All right, and so that's where we move to the introduction from fundamentalist to skeptic, where we kind of look at kind of who Bart Ehrman is, why he's been successful, why do we know his name? Very important kind of to know the person, because it kind of lines up well into knowing how he's approaching things and also questioning why are you approaching things like that. It seems like we've listened to presentations by Tim McGrew from Western Michigan University, where he actually critiques some of Bart Ehrman's stuff by appealing to earlier editions of Ehrman and books that they did together. And then when F.F. Bruce passed, Ehrman reissued some books where changes were made. It seems a little hinky, something a little hinky going on. But we won't cover probably that specific. But these claims have been out there, and so we want to look at the success of Bart Ehrman. We'll take a minute here to get better acquainted with Ehrman, the personal background and kind of his pilgrimage from this fundamentalist to skeptic.
That's right.
Seems weird, but it's been known to happen.
Oh yeah.
So as far as biblical scholars go, Ehrman's a rock star, right? There's no doubt about it. If you travel in the circles that we do, if we're reading something about a critique to biblical translation, contradictions, Ehrman's name comes up a lot. And he's been popularized all over. So he's a full-time professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's an adjunct professor at Duke University, and I think probably a lot of people, that's enough to turn him off because, Duke is bad. Sports ball, I don't get it, but I heard a lot of people say that. He has written numerous scholarly works and holds prestigious posts in academic societies. His scholarly credentials are impressive. There's no doubt about it. Nothing can be taken away from him there, and nor do we want to. Yet none of his professional academic achievements have made Bart Ehrman the near household name he has become. Ehrman's website lists 4 books written in the last 10 years, which is impressive. Probably not as impressive as Kustenberger does.
Well, yeah, but his is different because, they're...
Yeah, I mean, Ehrman's has been, all four of these in the last 10 years have made it to the New York Times top 10 bestseller list.
Yeah, so that's impressive, right? That's
right.
In other words, here's the issue. Why would somebody want to read a stuffy old book about scriptures and theology, and then why has it made it to the New York Times? Who reads that kind of stuff? Well, usually scholars do, right? And academics and that sort of thing. But the the everyday person, they want to read that stuff.
Right. And that's how popularized he's made it. He's able to kind of break it down to that level so that the New York Times can recommend that to you.
Oh yeah. And people want to read it, right?
Yeah. I mean, misquoting Jesus, that's a great title.
Yeah.
I mean, he's whoever his publisher is, that's a great title.
Right. So he's traveled the world in debates and lectures. So he's popular for several factors, right? Most importantly, he has the ability, and this is really, I think, is the most helpful thing here, to explain difficult concepts to a lay audience, right? So the folks that aren't the academicians, right, that don't know all of the the background and the history.
P52 once discovered.
Okay. But he can explain in such a way that these folks understand what's going on, and that is really helpful, right?
And so Ehrman himself would claim that he's not really an innovator when it comes to theology and the views that he presents. In fact, he's kind of popularized it. He's able to break it down. No one's really heard of the Bauer hypothesis in the manner that he presents it, but that's evident through and through in his presentations, and he doesn't claim to be. He readily admits this as well, which is a humbling experience, especially for someone so well known.
Yeah.
Rather, he summarizes well what other scholars argue concerning the Bible and early Christianity. He's a master at packaging these arguments, presenting them well. And what you should be aware of is that in presenting these arguments, Ehrman rarely acknowledges counter-arguments to his own position.
Oh, wow, yeah.
The treatment of a given issue in Ehrman's writing is far more one-sided than the real discussion taking place, which, if you're talking about a scholarly work, you're probably more likely to do that. Here's a counterclaim. You're responding to the counterclaim.
In fact, you're expected to do that.
You want to, because if you go through a peer review process, you're going to come back to those questions. So head them off at the pass. So this is the one thing that we hope to show, the book hopes to show, is that there are counter arguments that if you're reading Misquoting Jesus, he's not saying, no, someone could say, et cetera, and here's my response to that. here's the response book to that.
That's right. That's right. So 2 further reasons. So not only is he able to communicate these various ideas at a popular level so that lay folks understand it, but first, his success is in large part due to the fact that, these skeptical biases have led to negative conclusions that are, of great interest to other skeptics, right? Mm-hmm. So here now, if you take the Bible, the greatest story ever told, the most popular book in the world, right, the #1 bestseller, and you come up with these various skeptical conclusions. Well, people want to know about that, especially folks that that are skeptical themselves and don't want to believe, right? So Western culture obviously is becoming increasingly hostile to the exclusivity of truth, right? In terms of this is the truth and nothing else kind of thing, right? And so the sentiment is often that, everyone can believe anything that they want as long as they aren't saying other people's belief are wrong. That's the basic idea that where we're at today.
Right. And not Christianity either.
Yeah. So and so as a result, this skepticism, is big.
Yeah, it's more prevalent in the society now than ever. So that's a good reason for why we want to see if there are answers out there. If there's apologetic arrows that we want to add to our quiver, and there is. Hey, what do you know? We're only not even chapter 1 in this book. So, of course, Christianity not only calls for complete devotion and asks that for belief in certain exclusive truths. Increasingly, the culture is intolerant towards these claims. So
Christianity goes the opposite of what the culture is saying. The culture is
the
saying,
way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah, anything goes, right, as long as you don't step on somebody else's toes kind of thing, right? Christianity says, no, anything doesn't go, right? This is the truth, period, right? And so, wait a minute, right? There's an instant rebellion, right, as a result of our sin nature to somebody that says this, takes a stand like that. Right?
It's Pilate asking, what is truth? And Jesus going, I am the truth. The result is mounting cynicism toward Christianity and eager acceptance of counterclaims that reject historic Christianity. And, the post 9/11, world has drawn more rise to this, and I think we've been a little bit flat-foot since not since then, but we're picking up steam again. I think we were a little bit more on the lazy side before then, and Josh McDowell can only write so many big tomes of evidences before
demands our verdict.
Right. So embedded in Ehrman's story then is the story of many former card-carrying fundamentalists turned Bible critics. Is the pervasive skepticism and academic intolerance against faith, in particular Christian faith, they experience as students at institutions of higher learning. Yeah,
so oftentimes we get this, this story of, I was a Christian, I grew up in a Christian home, and I went off to school, and I got enlightened, and now I don't believe that stuff anymore, kind of thing, right? And so Bart Ehrman appeals to folks that have that kind of experience.
Yeah,
right?
I think that, the saying goes that culture is downstream from politics, meaning that whatever's happening in culture first becomes popular. Well, I'm of the belief that that academics is downstream from culture, in that what you see in academia with things like the rise of critical race theory and that type of philosophy was popularized and pushed early in colleges and academic circles, and is only now leaching into culture and now leaching into politics. Right. It seems like the spread of that is not years anymore, but months.
Right. It used to be where, the academia would kind of rule out this stuff.
Yeah, try to.
For lack of a better word, right? and so all the students and that sort of thing would buy into it, and then eventually it would trickle into the culture, and then really, become part of our political, view of things, right? And that would take quite a while. Now you're suggesting that it's boom.
It's a lot. It's
because we live in an information age.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And people, you can get on the internet, you can read, and so folks are immediately exposed to these various ideas.
Yeah. If we think about how just things have coalesced more and more, where information is being shared in shorter bursts and in more, 2008. Twitter and Facebook were still in their infancy. I remember getting on Twitter the first time
Twitter.
and getting the wail of death. That's what it had when it always timed out. And I was like, who's going to ever use this site? The president, world leaders, ISIS terrorists, The normal people now.
So this, this has resulted in then, because the Bible makes, claims that it is the truth, right? These exclusive claims, it has resulted in this intolerance. Everybody wants to throw rocks at it because it's saying, it's the only. So this problem with intolerance then is that the idea really is that all presuppositions are accepted in some sense by faith. Right, that's what folks are suggesting. Well, you only believe that by faith, right? So atheists obviously work from the same assumption that there's no God. Certainly, this assumption too requires a certain amount of faith. So it's not just Christians, but it's also any academic discipline and any belief system. Really, the ultimate truths of that belief system have to be accepted by faith, right? And so according to Ehrman, he simply puts aside his biases and faces the facts. So he would argue, well, no, I'm not dealing with a faith claim, right? I don't have any biases. I'm on neutral ground, and I can. And so let's put it, you Christians are biased because, you're believing by faith.
You believe it, so therefore you're biased.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he says he puts aside his biases and he doesn't operate with regard to
So he comes at it like a Mr. Spock or a robot or Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. He takes this like the Martian approach. Like he's a Martian, so he's kind of in the solar system, so he kind of knows what's going on, but he's just trying to be as impassive as possible. But lo and behold, guess what? Ehrman also makes assumptions too.
Oh no, really?
And it's almost like there's no neutrality. If only. So for example, he says we don't have the words that God inerrantly inspired.
Really?
Right.
All right. So how do we know that? Well, we'll take a look at that.
Yeah. So he makes this assertion.
That is a huge assumption.
Yeah. He talks about this in Misquoting Jesus. This is kind of the big conclusion, but it actually doesn't provide evidence that demonstrates we don't have the original wording in our manuscripts. In fact, on numerous occasions in numerous interviews, people are saying, "Well, what do you think the secret message was?" And, well, it's pretty much what we have. It's just we're not sure what it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we see then is that he's able to popularize these concepts and help the layperson understand what's going on, and he's captured this cynicism, we might say, in terms of criticism of the exclusivity of what the Bible has to say and that people hold to, and so that attracts people as well, right? And he makes the assumption that the believers are just operating on the basis of faith, and of course he's not doing that.
Putting the cart before the horse.
That's
I am not, because I am skeptical, and that's how you can trust me. And so his biases, this book contends, has led unduly skeptical conclusions that he draws from.
Right. So that's what they're going to try to show with this particular book.
Right.
The second explanation of Ehrman's appeal to a lay audience is tied to a misunderstanding of what faith really is. Right. Faith is understood in different ways, obviously, in our culture. One popular concept of faith is that it has nothing to do with reason or logic. Right. After all, some might say faith is not something you can seek to provide evidence for. Right. Or view rationally. You simply have to accept it. Right, that's the way faith works. It's just something you have to accept, right?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, though, they tell us here that too often people today do accept this idea of blind faith.
Neil deGrasse Tyson has that quote of, "That's why they call it faith. That's why they don't call it fact. If it wasn't faith, then it would be science. You would know it. So that's why religion is called faith. It's just a belief system. That's it. Okay. It's this wrong non-biblical idea of what faith is, and unfortunately some Christianity, some versions of the church have kind of espoused this to not answer difficult questions. Well, just believe it, that type of deal.
Yeah.
So the Bible, however, does not ask us for blind faith. It never does. Right. Not never, not once. In fact, "Come, let us reason together" is a call by God to Job.
Yeah.
The person that he just he gives a bunch of evidence for. Instead, it calls for a reasoned faith, a faith that looks at the evidence. Well, wait, hold on. I thought you guys were presuppositionalists. You guys don't deal with evidence. No, we deal with evidence within the confines of what our presuppositions allow. Yeah. And having an understanding.
In fact, everybody does that.
Everybody. Yeah. Absolutely everybody. Yeah. And that's where we see the value of presuppositionalism, is that it can make sense of how you make sense of evidence. Right. And so we love evidence. In fact, Bahnsen and Frame have argued, I think, conclusively that the best the best evidentialist is a presuppositionalist because you start out with the base model and then you can build up from there into presenting these evidence on a firm foundation and critique the other side for a foundation system that won't allow for these types of evidence to come into fruition. And there's a lot there, but we're just talking about evidence here, these types of evidence. And so reason faith is what Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says that Jesus died, he was buried, and when he was raised from the dead and the grave, and that if Jesus was never raised, then our entire faith is in vain.
There you go.
So right? we're not only dead men, we're the worst people, the worst type of people.
So it's either true or it's not. Either Jesus rose or he didn't. Right.
And so we're either still dead in our sins, or Jesus is the one that came and took those away if we believe in him. So this event either happened or didn't happen. It's the foundation for which Christianity lays its hat, and it's why so many scholars kind of work towards that and point to that. Classical apologists, evidentialists tend to point to the resurrection as some of the best proof for Christianity, and they're not wrong. Presuppositions would agree, and so we champion that their work, and it's helpful and it's great. But Paul doesn't ask for this blind faith. He claims there are people, like 500 people that have seen the risen Jesus that you can go out and talk to at the time of the writing of his letters.
So there's your evidence, right? In fact, we have the testimony of folks that are still alive and are able to talk about it.
And the whole claim of like, they just got rich off of it, to fill the coffers. That's not happening in first century anything. That's not happening in second century anything. That's not happening in third century, especially when Rome is tearing your throat out, burning your scripture. Why would you do that for this nonsense? From because of faith, right? Why would you do that? Because, especially if you knew it didn't really happen, right? It would be so easy for the Romans just to go, no, it's Jesus' body. Pontius Pilate said he's right here. He's right here. Okay. And so Paul publicly announces that these witnesses are still alive, that you can go talk to them. It would have been super easy. Like, 500? Well, I didn't find John and Bill. Okay, well, here's Luke, Mark, John, Thaddeus. Come up with 498 other names, and Paul is pointing to that. It would have been easily to falsify it then. And so when we work in history, then it's a little bit more difficult, and that we can't interview these 500 people, and so we have to rely on the scholarship to present this. So it would have been easy to prove Paul wrong. He had no fear of pointing to people to make evidentialist claims, and so he did it with an understanding of worldview and try to bring the Romans up to a kind of a conscientious understanding of their worldview at Mars Hill. But he also present them the gospel truth that that in their hearts that they have an understanding of a God who is there, that they worship from afar, but Christ has come so that you might believe. And some did believe, while others mocked him because of the philosophy of having an understanding that there's life after death, which was a weird thing, a physical life after death, which is a weird thing for the Romans. They didn't like that.
Right. Greeks didn't either.
So
in part, then, Ehrman's books seem to have drawn a large following because he's talking about things most people, never really learn about in church. I mean, if you just take everything by faith, then you don't have to study these things and ferret out.
Yeah, why do anything in church? That's a weird thing to do. Just do it. That's just a Nike version of it.
That's right. Weird. The Nike version of church, right?
Right.
Ehrman knows all too well that the average person in the pew has little to no knowledge of the historical and theological issues that he raises, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that this book wants to show us is that, unfortunately, all too often, Ehrman's rhetoric and his interpretations conceal more than they reveal.
Right.
He leaves the impression that his view is the standard fare of all biblical scholars. This is what scholars believe, right? And so, obviously among some circles,
the science says.
That's right.
Yeah.
Science says. Right?
Science or scientists?
Science.
Right.
Not scientists, right? So obviously, among some scholars, this is true. This is what some scholars believe. His position, that sort of thing.
We would put Ehrman as a scholar.
Yeah, but
no doubt about it.
Plenty of scholars see things different than the way Ehrman sees them. Right. And so, so you have this kind of an assumption of authority that he gives when he's making his presentations, right?
Because the truth claims that he does present, saying things like, Paul definitely wrote Romans.
Right.
Okay, well, I know he doesn't believe in it, so therefore his
so it's enough. He gives us enough
weight.
of that so that that we can buy the rest of the stuff that he's selling, right?
and so he kind of trades on that reputation.
Yeah.
But if you come to believe in it, then you're kicked out, right? So whether written for a lay audience or not, a work of scholarship should set out to defend a position against the best of the opposing position. So you can maybe give him credit for things like misquoting Jesus and not presenting it because you want to sell books or whatever it might be. And you might not want to deal with all the critiques. You just want to present your positive case, and that's fine. People do that all the time. But to say that there's no answers outside this book would be disingenuous.
Or this is what all the scholars believe. Well, wait a minute. If you're talking about scholars, then you at least need to include some criticisms, critiques, and that sort of thing. Otherwise, it's not really a scholarly writing. Right. Now, again, he's writing for the lay audience, but still, you want people to understand, at least some of the arguments against your position, so that they can understand that you have good reasons to believe what you believe. Right? Reading
anything by Kruger, the question of the canon is a great one. His one that he wrote with Kostenberger, the heresy of orthodoxy. They're always quick to admit when the other side has a really good point, and they talk about the positive aspects to different approaches outside of theirs, and I respect that, and I get a lot from that, because they're saying, hey, this isn't just, they're the other side and they're wrong, they're stupid. No, they're saying that there's value in looking at it through this way, and responding to the best arguments the other side has to offer gives you the best kind of bulletproof for their arguments. Yeah. That's what you want to do. That's what you would want to have done to yours, and you want to present it accurately and in the best light possible. You want to kind of Iron Man it instead of straw man it. So as will become apparent in subsequent chapters, Ehrman has a way of stereotyping scholarship depending on whether it agrees with its own views. He routinely misrepresents, underrepresents, or never represents those who oppose his position. Mm-hmm. So sometimes he'll say, well, this person's a believer. He's a Christian, and so he falls outside the circle that I draw where, you have to look at things through a secular-only skeptical viewpoint, and that's how you get the best version of truth, because you're not clouding it with this bias of faith. So that's where he kind of draws his circles. So our problem with Ehrman's book is not that he's making historical arguments, because that's what they expect him to do. While we think people should simply ignore the evidence and believe blindly, that's not what they want, of course. We never want that. No one ever should want that. Our problem with his book is that we are convinced Ehrman's arguments are not the best ones, and he's done little to acknowledge scholarly alternatives to his position. Right,
and so what they want to do then, since they have this problem, is to point out the other side of the story. Right, they believe that Ehrman is only giving us one side of the story, right, and they want us to see that there is another side of the story. Right, and so. The other thing they do then is they make Ehrman's book, his positions rather, a test case, right? So that, they're not trying to convince Ehrman that he's wrong, right? Yeah. Or other scholars, skeptical scholars, that they're right, right? Well, they say that we trust, Ehrman, knows most of the information that they set forth in these pages, and has chosen to follow his own line of reasoning due to a variety of factors. Instead, what they're trying to do is, writing to those who have not encountered the arguments that are against what Ehrman has to say, right? And who need better understanding of the other side of the argument. So that's what they're trying to present, the other side of the story. Right.
So Ehrman is not alone in offering the kind of objections you'll see in this book. He readily admits that, for the most part, he has only popularized views that have been around in scholarly discussions for a long time. Some of his dissertations are completely kind of benign of this, of the rhetoric. He writes in scholarly fashion. He has the ability to do that, but he also has the ability to popularize this, as is proof by the New York Times list and just how there are response books. I think if you have a response book written against you, you're in good company among good critics.
Yeah, yeah.
In this way, our response to Ehrman serves as a kind of test case, as Tony was saying, and engaging with skeptical scholarship in general. In the pages to follow, you will not only see many of the problems attached to Ehrman's skeptical conclusions, but you'll also be in a better position to respond to the objections posed by critiques of the Bible in general and equip others to do the same.
Right. So this will be an educational process where they're using Ehrman's positions and his arguments to help us to understand, in general, these types of positions and arguments, so that we're better able to respond to these when we see them in other places. Right.
Yeah, and so if you've never been through this type of, the Bible as history, the Bible in history, the transmission of the Bible, give us some time. It might be kind of difficult at first to understand the nomenclature. Use the glossary in the back of the book. The internet is a great and dangerous place, and so there are other people to recommend. There are good debates that Ehrman has done with people like James White, who is a textual criticism scholar on our side, and a presuppositionalist to boot. Michael J. Kruger, we mentioned, Kostenberger has written with him as well. Kruger has his blog that he responds to things from Ehrman about from time to time too. There are a lot of good resources out there, and so we encourage you to kind of keep the faith.
Yeah.
This book, as we keep the faith with this book.
So truth in a culture of doubt. So this will be an exciting time, and we hope that you are able to get a lot out of this.
Yeah.
Out of this discussion.
So chapter 1 next time. We'll see how far we get into it, and we'll figure out where to go from there. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.